Welcome to Blooming Wildwood Homestead. On today's episode of Homestead Coffee Talk, we are talking about seed starting versus buying transplants. Thank you for joining me today. Grab your coffee, tea, water, whatever you're drinking, or maybe a project, and let's chat a little bit about seed starting versus buying transplants. When you're first getting started with gardening, it's very likely that you're buying transplants at the store and just putting those into your garden. Maybe you have some seed that you're direct sowing into the garden during the summertime, but more than likely you haven't started out buying seed packets and starting those indoors earlier in the season. So as you kind of go through your progression, you might be wondering which one is better and when do I decide if I should move from buying transplants into doing my own seed starting earlier in the year. And that's what I want to talk about today. So for today's conversation, we are talking about seed starting from the perspective of starting them indoors earlier so that you can transplant seeds outside. We know that there are some seeds that are not good candidates for starting indoors because maybe it's a root crop or it's something that just doesn't transplant well. And so regardless of what we talk about today, you are going to have to go ahead and start those outside in the garden directly. So for today's conversation, when I refer to seed starting, I'm talking about starting your seeds indoors earlier in the season versus buying your transplants at the store or the nursery and bringing those in and planting in your garden. One of my goals during the month of February is to work on projects as I am going throughout the course of the month. I want to do something every single day that impacts the garden and moves things forward. Today I'm working on putting together one of my plant stands so that I have the light available for some of the seed starts that I'm working with today. There are a number of seed starting pros. One of those is that it costs less. There is an initial upfront cost. You want to be able to figure out some sort of system for a grow light, especially if you live in the Pacific Northwest. It's much cooler. We just don't have the length of day here at this particular point in time, but it's really important that we're getting some of those crops started that need a longer time to get to maturity. If I don't start some of those things early enough, they won't have time to fully come into their own, fully mature before we're back into bad weather. So for that reason, I need a grow light that I can go ahead and put in the house, or if you have a designated space that you're using for your seed starting or for your seeds as they're growing. Then you're also going to have a few things that you might need for seed starting. I like to use a soil blocker, and so I need the trays and the soil blocker, and then that's something that's going to be reusable and something that's going to get me through multiple seasons. It's kind of a one-time purchase that's going to help me to continue to start seeds throughout the course of my gardening time. So there is some initial upfront cost, and that sometimes I think kind of deters people or holds them back. But overall, if you're looking at long-term, the long-term cost is actually going to be less. You can get a packet of broccoli, for example, even now at a much higher rate than it was not that long ago. You can get a packet of broccoli for $3.25. Within that packet, you're going to be able to get an average of 150 plants from that one seed packet. In contrast, I don't know what transplants are going to cost this year, but if the price of primroses is any indication of what we could be expecting for our vegetable transplants, I think we're kind of in a bit of trouble here because primroses are going for about $2 a piece right now. And just last year, you were able to find them for $1 a piece. Sometimes $1.25 was kind of the high end of things. So gauging off of the price of primroses, my guess is our transplants are going to be a bit more this year as well. So for approximately, let's say the price of 2 transplants, you could get 150 plants from a seed packet. So just to kind of help weigh out some of that cost. And then of course, if you're saving your own seed, that cost is going to be reduced even further because you're going to be using your own seed and you don't have to buy that. The second pro to starting your own seeds would be timing. As I already said, for some of our plants here, we need to start them a bit earlier. But that doesn't necessarily mean that some things can't go outdoors into a greenhouse or something like that. So if you want to have more control over the timing and the placement of your plants, it's better to do it yourself. If you're purchasing transplants from the store or the nursery, you're running off of their time schedule and when they get those plants in and when they have them available to sell to you. You're also limited to whatever time period and time frame that they have them available. So they might not have them available for the whole time that you would want to maybe do succession planting or something like that. So timing is a big reason why seed starting could be beneficial. The third thing is variety. When you purchase from a store or a nursery, you're limited to the varieties that they are carrying that year. If you purchase seeds, on the other hand, you have a lot more option and a lot more variety. This can be very advantageous for the urban gardener where you have a smaller area that you're trying to work with. If you are starting your own seed, you could potentially run with some smaller plants that are going to take up less space or be more compact and just be a little more suitable to your small compact gardening area. Sometimes I know it kind of comes into play, like if I'm in town, do I do seed starting or should I just buy seeds? And when I was living in town and doing my urban garden, I went ahead and did seed starting for the very reason that I had options to do different varieties, and it also allowed me to do succession planting, which was really important when I only had a limited amount of space and I wanted to be able to maximize that so I could have continuous harvest for fresh food throughout the course of the summer and into early fall. So variety can be really important. The other thing is you also have the option to do heirloom varieties versus maybe the hybrid that might be available. And that's not to say that you can't find some heirloom varieties in the store, but it just really depends. And again, you're limited to whatever it is that they decide to grow and whatever they're selling to you. So that can be kind of a limiting factor in that area. The last thing I have on this list for a seed starting pro would be seed saving. I already alluded to this a little bit earlier when it came to cost, but if you are starting your own seed, you have the option to do seed saving. And with that, I'm talking about having those heirloom varieties, having control over whether or not your items are open pollinated so that you can save seed from them and then reuse that seed the following year, which will reduce your cost and can really just get you into this nice cycle where you're becoming a little bit more self-sufficient and you can keep the garden going with what you have. And ideally, that would be kind of the ultimate if you're able to do that seed saving. So those are a few of my pros for seed starting. One of the projects that I've been working on is putting together my light frame, my grow light frame. So I really like this frame. I don't know that you can find this exact one anymore. If I find it, I will link to it down in the description. But you really could put together any kind of grow light that you wanted to, as long as you have the right light. And then you could take and maybe do a metro rack or something like that, and then just figure out how you're going to make your light fixtures adjustable so that you can get them closer to the plants and the closer to the tray as the seeds are starting to get going, and then you can raise it up as the plants start growing. Now those little guys are going to get the light that they need in order to thrive and become beautiful plants. So let's talk a little bit about the pros of buying transplants. One of the pros of buying transplants is the time and labor that it can save. If you're buying the transplant at the store, you're not going to have to go through that whole process of getting your seeds started, transplanting them up, getting them ready to go out into the garden at a later date. They're already ready to go straight out when you get them. So if you don't have the time to be able to kind of go through that process and nurture them along, perhaps buying transplants might be a good option. They do also require some time as far as making sure that they're staying healthy and that they're germinating and that everything is just going well. So it could save you some time to just go ahead and buy the transplant. The other reason why you might want to buy a transplant is the number of plants. So if you're doing more container gardening where maybe you live in an apartment or maybe you're living in a duplex or someplace where you just don't really have the yard space and you don't have option to do a full-blown garden and you're doing more container gardening, transplants might be a good option for you because you can just buy a small quantity and a small number. You might just need 1 or 2 tomato plants. You might only need, 4 lettuce plants to put in a pot. So if you're doing more of the container gardening, buying transplants might be the better option for you. Another reason why buying transplants might be a benefit would be to try new items. Sometimes you want to try something new and you don't want to go and buy a whole packet of seed or go to the trouble of getting it going if you don't know if you're even going to like that item or if you're even gonna like the variety. So if you wanted to try something new, sometimes it can be nice to go ahead and buy some transplants so that you can try that new thing. And then if you're deciding to go with more seed saving, then you could do that at a later date. So let's get to the bottom line here. And basically my overall thought on this is that you need to do whatever is going to help you to get that garden in the ground. There have been times when I've done a combination of both. I've started seeds and I've gotten them going and transplanted things out into my garden, and I've also bought a few things. This was especially true when I lived in the city. What I found though was that some of the store-bought plants were just not as hardy and they didn't really thrive as well as I wanted them to. I would find a difference between the plants that I bought and plants that I had started or plants that my parents had given me. There was just a huge difference in those two kinds of plants, and the ones that had been started from home were hardier, they were more disease resistant, and just thrived so much better than the plants that came from the store. The plants from the store just weren't doing well. It could have been the year, it might have been the variety. It's really hard to say exactly what caused that, but I did notice a difference between the two. Sometimes when you're buying transplants from the store, depending on where it is, they might not be the best about watering all the time and keeping consistent water to the plant. So you're buying a transplant and the roots are already dried out and then they hurried up and watered them again, trying to rehydrate them, but they were already kind of gone. And this can be problematic when you're trying to get going. However, it just depends. You might go to a nursery where they have really good quality plants and you might not have that problem at all. So you really need to do whatever's going to help you to get started with gardening and get that garden in the ground. If that means that your first few years you're buying transplants just to kind of get your feet wet and get things going, or you need to buy transplants because your first year you were getting your garden bed set up and you didn't have time to focus on getting the garden bed set up and getting your seeds started and being ready to go, then do what you need to do to get that garden in the ground. That's going to be your main priority. And as you're continuing to gain more experience and you are getting more comfortable with things, you might want to try your hand at seed starting, because I think that you would find there are a lot of benefits to that. So my overall thought is seed starting is definitely where it's at. It allows you to do succession planting. It allows you to plant things when you need to, allows you the variety, the option for seed saving, all of the benefits that I already talked about. But if you need to buy transplants because you didn't get something going early enough, or something didn't come up the way it was supposed to, or you just need to have some transplants to get that put in the ground, then do that. Whatever it takes to get started with your garden, that's what you want to do, and that's where you want to focus. I hope today's video was helpful to you. Please remember to like, and if you would like to subscribe and be part of our community here, we would love to have you. Until next time, bye everyone.